Hello, and welcome to another Half Pint session. One of the great things about doing these Half Pint sessions is occasionally publishers and media companies reach out to me and say, hey, we've got these people. We think you should talk to them. And a lot of the time I go, I'm not really that interested. But this project caught my attention. And I then headed down a rabbit hole and found out that these guys have been working very hard recently, producing tons of stuff. And for that alone, I thought they should come on and tell us about it. Brad Gray, Brad Nelson, welcome to the show.
Thank you.
It's great to be on. Thanks for having us.
Well, we were talking before we hit record, and I said, it's like, oh, how am I going to refer to you both? Like Nelson and Gray? It's like, that actually sounds like a high-end purveyor of tea products, or maybe an indie band. But Brad Gray, let's start with you. Would you mind just introducing yourself?
Yeah. I'm one of the two Brads on the call, and I actually live in the greater Nashville area. And my world has been helping people to understand the Bible in its original context of history, geography, cultural backgrounds, and more. And so I served as a pastor up in Michigan for a number of years, have been leading biblical study hiking trips for about the last 15 years. And then 8 years ago, we're just finishing our 8th year, launched an organization called Walking the Text. And we do digital media resources, study trips, film projects, a host of things all around helping people to experience the Bible the way the writers of the Bible assumed their audience were experiencing it. And so I have the privilege of leading that organization. And my wife and I have been married for 22 years, and we've got 4 kids. So everything's got to come back to how does this change the way that we're, teaching other human beings how to be responsible people in the world. And so my wife and I, we've got 3 boys and a girl, an 18-year-old, 16, 14, and 11. So it is festive in our household, and we love it.
Yes. I teach mine to be good people by putting locks on the doors. It's like, Daddy's recording. Stay out.
I had to have that little quick convo with my brood just a few moments ago. So yeah, I feel you, man. I feel you.
That's great.
And the whole idea of helping people dig into the word more deeply, it's been something that's been near and dear to my heart for a long time. People that listen to the podcast will know that I've said it was literally a book that I spent 2 months writing, how to set up a Bible study, and then I discovered that editing is hard and very tiring and not anywhere near as fun as doing the initial writing. So that's stayed in purgatory ever since. But one of these days I'll get back to it. But the other Brad Nelson, would you mind introducing yourself?
Sure. Yeah, I'm Brad Nelson, and I'm actually a very similar story to Brad's. Brad and I are best friends going back to our freshman year in college, where we met at Cornerstone University in West Michigan. And Brad was there as a basketball player. I was there as a soccer player, and we met in preseason and quickly realized this is another person who's trying to become the same kind of person that I am. And it just led to a lifelong friendship. And we've done a lot of hard stuff together, marriage, miscarriage, loss, celebration. And it's a beautiful thing when you're called in to work with your best friend. I was also a pastor for 20 years, 10 years in Michigan, 10 years in Florida, and been married to my wife, Trisha, for 23 years. We've got 3 daughters. One is a sophomore in college. One just got her first vehicle last week. So we're now insuring 2 teen drivers, which really drove me to the Lord's Prayer, honestly.
I was just going to say, I bet your prayer life has really gone through the roof recently.
And then we've got a 10-year-old. So
it was funny because my second teenager driver started 2 weeks before his. So we've been going through the same, man, insurance is how much for 2 teenagers? Yeah, exactly.
This is why we need to stay in the middle of nowhere. It's like, no, there's no need for you to drive anywhere.
Right. But interestingly, between Brad and I, Brad is an amazing biblical mind. I tell people he's like a walking, talking Bible encyclopedia. And I share a passion for that as well, but I'm really more of a storyteller and a writer. And interesting connection. one of the things that tipped me into writing was C.S. Lewis. And I came across the first paragraph of A Grief Observed, where he
No one ever
talks
told me
about,
that grief felt so much like fear.
oh, it was the first time I ever read a paragraph over and over the same way I listened to a song, because it just, what it did to me listening to it was so visceral. And so that launched a whole, like, I read all of Lewis's stuff that I could get my hands on, and off into writing as a career.
Fun fact, I first read A Grief Observed in my first month of marriage. I have no idea what made me do it. But I woke up one morning. My wife is a deep and late sleeper. So I got up, made myself a pot of tea, and thought, I'm going to read something. And that was on the shelf. And for whatever reason, I pulled it off the shelf. And it reminded me of the lesson in the Four Loves, that to love at all is to place your heart in a position to be broken. So I do question my sanity that I picked that book up then, but maybe there was some rhyme and reason to it, at least in my subconscious. But enough about my oddities. Let's talk about yours. So, Brad the Grey, would you mind just telling us some of the things that you've worked on up until now, and then how the two of you then came to collaborate on a series of projects?
Yeah, so Nelson joined us at Walking the Text a few years ago in a full-time capacity, which was fantastic because we had been doing a number of projects together outside of my organization and outside of what he was doing, always kind of biblically oriented, and then finally got him into the fold, which was really great. And he came in at a very critical juncture. We had been working on some stuff, and Brad had actually been with us for part-time for a while. And 6 years ago, we started working on the idea of how could we create the highest quality documentary television series that's ever been done on the Bible. Not so that we could say that, but because we just had a strong conviction. This is 6 years ago, where most of the Christian media stuff was subpar, to be generous. Mm-hmm. And this was early days Bible Project really coming to the fore, Chosen getting started, a lot of other projects that have just really demonstrated great high quality, media over the last couple of years. And so we started working on this idea around the Lord's Prayer, something that everybody's familiar with, but the vast majority of people have no idea how deep the rabbit hole goes with each phrase of the Lord's Prayer and just the implications for daily living. I know for me, I had my own kind of transformational experience of the Lord's Prayer about 7 years ago. And just for the sake of my own soul, like, it just reframed how I prayed, how I thought about the mission of Jesus, how I taught it. And then when we started working on this idea, we said, okay, well, let's just do the Lord's Prayer, and 7 episodes through the 7 phrases. Each episode would be the next phrase. And then early last year, Mark Burnett of Shark Tank, Survivor, The Voice fame, one of the most legendary television producers in the world, saw our pilot episode and said, hey, I'd love to be part of it. And his highest recommendation was, like, do it in a film version first. Like, give people kind of a foray into your contextual approach to the Bible, this immersive documentary experience. We filmed it in 6 countries for both the television series and the film. And so we've been working on a film, a television series, and then in the midst of this, Brad and I realized very quickly, because Brad serves as one of the writers for the film and the television series, is there's so much we would want people to know about the Lord's Prayer that we can't handle it all in a film or a television series. We also need to write a book. And so we worked together, and I really spearheaded the whole filming aspect. Brad really spearheaded the writing aspect. We collaborated on everything, but a little bit of dividing and conquering. And as just a few weeks ago, the film and the book dropped on the exact same day. And our television series is going to release here in a few months. So we've just been living, studying, teaching, soaking ourselves in the Lord's Prayer. And now we're excited that other people now get to experience just the journey that God has had us on, better understanding, but more importantly, living out the Lord's Prayer on a daily basis.
Brad Nelson, why don't you pick up the story from there? What did all of that look like?
Well, one of the most interesting parts of it was we spent some time in Oxford, UK, doing an
Place
interview
near and
at,
dear
yeah,
to my
it's
heart.
so
My co-host
beautiful.
says that heaven will be many things, but there will certainly at least be a doorway that takes you straight to Oxford.
And it's got to be a hidden doorway, like
Yeah.
the one going to Turf Tavern, which is just a fantastic place. But so we got to spend an afternoon with N.T. Wright at Yarnton Manor, and just interviewing him on, the specifically the phrase "Our Father," and so that was really beautiful. But yeah, over the last year, it's been all right. Let's get this book, this film out to the world, and the way that God has taken that and blessed it, and now the book is in people's hands. The show is out on Angel. The episodic series is going to launch next Easter. Um, it's been really fantastic, and it's been a huge learning process for how do you run to keep up with what God's doing.
And who else have you been interviewing? I saw quite a lot of names that I recognized.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, we have actually a number of people that are in the film, and everybody in the film is also in the series. But we also had some people in the series that it just didn't fit to get them into the film because we were taking a 3.5 hour series and trying to put it into an 80-minute experience. So yeah, so NT Wright's in it. Um, Carmen Imes, who's just a really fantastic professor out of Biola, is in it. Shively Smith, who's out of Boston, she's done her PhD work on the life of Peter, which was just fascinating. Dr. Randall Smith, who might be just the best kept secret. He's somebody
So
that
true.
he just keeps a low profile, and he's behind so many of the things that people experience, especially when they go on trips in Italy or Greece or Israel. Like he's writing a lot of the curriculum that people are experiencing through their guides and all of that. And then a dear friend, both Brad and I, who's one of our Israeli guides, who is a desert survivalist. He's in it as well. The brilliant Dr. Jonathan Pennington, who is in the Louisville area, just tremendous amount of work on the idea of the kingdom of heaven and how does that particularly work in the Gospel of Matthew. And then we have a scientist. We have a brilliant scientist, Dr. Michael Guillen, who's a threefold PhD from Cornell in mathematics, astronomy, and physics, and a distinguished professor at Harvard University. And just fantastic and just really helping people to understand even some of the science of today behind cosmology, which factors into the second part of the Lord's Prayer. Yeah, and then we've got a number of other people that will be showing up in the television series. So the fun thing for us was we really worked hard to find just great voices that are very good on camera, which is not always the case with scholars, and then being able to go and basically throw them softballs, right into their bread and butter subject matters that they have done their PhDs in, they've done courses in, and just say, hey, help us to better understand it. And so that was a key aspect to what we were doing, because we're shooting it on location in Israel, Greece, England, Israel, Jordan, Israel. I think I said already twice there, and then we wanted to be able to bring in other scholarly voices, and then have a really great mix of animation and artist renderings of what these places would have looked like. So, yeah, it came together really well.
Anyone who's ever attended a wedding between a Catholic and a Protestant will have noted the funny thing that happens when, during the wedding ceremony, when everybody recites the Lord's Prayer, the Protestants just keep going. So there is a doxology at the end of the Our Father.
There is.
How did you decide whether or not you're going to do it?
Yeah, that's a great question. Nelson, you can jump in here as well. I'll take the first stab. When we were putting it together, we wanted to be able to tackle the prayer that Jesus gave, and that ending is something that got added a little bit later, not too much later. This was something that was really fun in the initial research 7 years ago that I was doing on the Lord's Prayer is that it will always be, whether you take more of the King James, for thine is the kingdom and the power and the glory, or more of an updated translation, for yours is the kingdom and the power and glory forever, amen. You'll see that the end of the Lord's Prayer in the text is always footnoted because that's never actually in the text. And then it'll be in the subtext or in the notes, and it'll say, this ending is first showing up in 4th and 5th century manuscripts. What never gets footnoted is that the Didache, which was that 1st century discipleship training manual, either late 1st century, early 2nd century, is the first place that actually lists the Lord's Prayer outside of the biblical manuscripts. And it ends with, for yours is the glory and the power. It doesn't have kingdom. Like, kingdom comes later, and all what they're doing there is just noting that you're nodding, you know where I'm going with this. It was their way of tying up the prayer to be used for liturgical purposes, and it is very biblical. It's actually being drawn from a prayer that shows up in Chronicles, and very, very common to do something like this. And so for us, since it wasn't on the lips of Jesus on the Sermon on the Mount, and that it was later an addition in order to tie up the prayer, we would reference it in the film. We would reference it because we didn't want people to go, wait a minute, you ended at, lead us not into temptation, but deliver us from evil. And you didn't say the ending. We do reference that. And in the book, we kind of expound on that a little bit more, and just the Didache's usage, and which is, by the way, also really fascinating, because after it gives that part of the summation, the doxology piece, it then says, and you shall pray this way 3 times a day. Mm-hmm. So obviously we don't know was the entire Christian community doing this, but at least the segment that composed the Didache, they were at least instructing one another in this discipleship training manual that the Lord's Prayer is something to be recited multiple times a day, not just once a day, which I believe Jesus wants us to pray that prayer every day. So yeah, so that was kind of the thought behind it. And we were originally starting with the television series, and the Lord's Prayer breaks down perfectly into 7 phrases. And we were 7 sounds very biblical. Nobody does that because it's got to be an even number. Mm-hmm. But we were that's a good biblical number. We're sticking with it. And it was footnoted, so we'll footnote it as well.
Yeah, I remember when I first read the Didache, and I had Christian friends from across the spectrum, and it was only when I came to the Didache that I was like, oh, this is where it came from. And then I dug a little deeper and found out that there was more to that story than simply that it was in the Didache.
Right.
But it was literally the first thing that popped into my head as soon as I saw it. I was like, ooh, I wonder if they're going to do that as well.
So you always get different questions from people that are enjoying a pint during an interview. I just feel like they're way more insightful, So coincidence?
I think not. It's a dark. I'm so curious to know what it is.
It is this milk stout.
Oh, there we go. Left-hand milk stout. Well played. Well played, sir.
Well, we have a brand to keep up, so this is for my art as well as inspiration. Well, let me ask you then this: what do people mostly misunderstand most about the Lord's Prayer? Or put another way, what is sort of one of the chief things that you want people to get out of the Lord's Prayer as a result from reading the book, watching the TV series, and the movie?
Yeah.
Great question. Yeah, Nelson, why don't you start, man?
Yeah, I think the biggest challenge we face with the Lord's Prayer is its familiarity. Mm-hmm. It's probably the most well-known prayer in human history. People, whether or not they're, in a worship service on a regular basis, can probably recite it from memory, or certainly recognize it when somebody else is saying it. And you would think that familiarity would be a good thing. But in actuality, I think it was Dallas Willard who writes, familiarity breeds unfamiliarity, and unfamiliarity breeds contempt. Mm-hmm. And so we get so comfortable with something that we think we know what it means. And this is something that we have to keep coming back to, is you're never going to wrap your arms around what Jesus is doing. You're never going to wrap your arms around the cross. You're never going to wrap your arms around resurrection. It's something that you have to keep entering into again and again and again. And what's fascinating about the Lord's Prayer, and one of the reasons that we chose to focus all this project on it, is that we're convinced that it is very possibly the most important passage in all of Scripture for understanding who God is, why Jesus came, and what our role is here on earth. I mean, Jesus gives the prayer in Matthew's gospel as a part of the Sermon on the Mount in Matthew 5, 6, and 7, which is really his kingdom manifesto. If you are going to be a follower of Jesus, this right here is the life he's calling you to. And from a literary perspective, the way Matthew structures the Sermon on the Mount is he places the Lord's Prayer, and Dr. Jonathan Pennington helped us identify this. He places the Lord's Prayer at the center of the center of the center of the Sermon on the Mount. So Matthew's doing everything in his literary power to say, look here, don't miss this. And what happens is when you take each line of the prayer and you dig into its original context, by which we mean history, culture, literary design, language, visual background, geographical setting, what you start to see is that there is a seminal contextual insight for every single line of the prayer that is like a rabbit hole, that when you understand it in its original context, it takes this thing that you thought you knew and makes it unfamiliar again in the most pleasing kind of way.
It's funny. My son will be going to school in a couple of years, and at his school they teach Latin, and I did it at school and forgot everything because I hated it. So this past year I picked up Duolingo and went through their Latin course to try and bring myself back up to speed. And one of the things I've started doing is learning the Our Father in Latin. And I have found that the process of doing that has a habit of focusing my mind more on what I'm saying because it is unfamiliar. Earlier, the other Brad was talking about the Didache, talking about praying the Our Father 3 times a day. In the Eastern Church today, so in Eastern Orthodox and Byzantine Catholic, you will still regularly see that in their devotional texts, in their preparations for confession. They say, "Have you been praying the Our Father 3 times a day? You know, do you have a good prayer life?" In other words, and so I have found, at least for myself, the learning the Our Father in another language to be really helpful. And because I'm a nerd, the next language I want to do is High Elvish from Lord of the Rings. But that says more about me than anything else. Brad the Great, we just spoke about the different kinds of lenses over which you can view each line, and that seems to be at the heart of your system. So would you mind just talking us through that a little bit?
Yeah. So for my own journey, like I had the privilege of, after getting my master's of divinity, actually going and studying in Israel. And that was just such a catalytic, eye-opening experience for me to be able to live there, to be able to walk the land, to be taken with some of the best professors in the world, to these archaeological sites, and just begin to grow in my understanding of context. It was a few years prior to that, came in contact with somebody who was really teaching a lot on context. And, you hear, if you go through education or even seminary, like, okay, what's the context? What's the context? Meaning, like, where are you at in the letter or the book of the Bible? What's happening before? What's happening after? And that is context. It's a limited form of context. And what for me started to happen is that when I started to experience the Bible taught in its comprehensive context of the history, the geography, the cultural backgrounds, and everything, all of a sudden, my understanding of the Word of God went way deeper, and my desire to walk it out was more passionate. And so when I served as a pastor, and I know this has been part of Nelson's journey as well, is that the vast majority of people have never been taught how to think about the original context of the Bible. Everybody knows that context is everything. Quote somebody out of context and they will let you know that context is everything. And yet the first question most of us ask when we open up our Bibles is, what does this mean for me? And our whole premise is we want to start with, what did it mean for them then? And once we've understood that, then we come into the present and we can ask better questions and draw deeper implications for what it means for us now. And so my whole teaching journey of taking people on these biblical study hiking trips and just watching, the light bulbs going on over and over and over again, it was, we need to create something that can help get context to the masses, because unfortunately, and there has been a shift in the academia system, in the academic system, but many people who are teaching grad students have never set foot in the Bible lands. They were never taught that, so they don't know some of the key stuff there. And so we just see the work that we get to do to be helpful, to come alongside of people who want to better understand the Word of God and to be able to get access to information that they may struggle to find on their own. And quite frankly, just from an experiential level, the most significant experience I've ever had in my faith life was going on my first study trip. The most impactful thing I do is take people on study trips, and 99.9% of people who are professing Christians, let alone the rest of the world, professing Christians will never set foot in the Holy Lands. And so this was a big thing for us, is wanting to be able to bring this contextual approach, immerse people into the biblical story, show them how it all works together, in the hopes that people will not only want to get into the Word of God more, but they're actually going to understand more of what they're reading. Because the number one reason why people don't read their Bible is not because they don't want to, it's because they find it so difficult that they get tired. And they're like, I just don't want to go through the frustration of not understanding. It's much easier for me to throw on a Netflix episode, of whatever that is. Yeah.
Yeah, that on-ramp is really crucial. And we've said forever, since we've been doing this podcast about 9 years now, that we always wanted it to be an on-ramp for Lewis, because we think he's a very accessible writer. But there are some landmines along the way. He lived a while ago in a different culture to a lot of his readers. So there's lots of things that can trip you up along the way through. And it would be very sad that if somebody abandoned reading him because of that. And if that's true for Lewis, it's, probably true for Jesus as well. But the entire contextual approach, I remember the first time, it was actually in an apologetic situation where somebody asked me about the feeding the 5,000 and 4,000. It's like, come on, isn't this just an error? It just happened to be in there twice. And the rabbit hole that I went down on that, it led me to the question of geography. And I discovered that the 4,000 takes place near the Decapolis, which is a much larger Gentile area. And then suddenly all of the numbers started making an awful lot more sense. That in a Jewish context, you have 5 loaves, like the 5 books of the Torah. It feeds 5,000. There are 2 fish in the Old and New Testament. That there are then 12 baskets, the 12 tribes, all of the 12s in the Old Testament, because there are about 1 million of them. Yet in the 4,000, suddenly we see then 7 appearing everywhere. A number of completeness and wholeness, the totality that Jesus came not just for the Jew, but also for the Gentile.
Absolutely. And that's everywhere. That's the thing that's so much fun, is that most people don't realize that kind of textual depth is sitting under all the words that are in Scripture. And like, for you, it's like, okay, and you start, and the thing is you started with the question, was this really one story or was this 2? And if it's 2, why the numbers, and then it leads you to a question of geography, and you realize what the Decapolis meant and how the Decapolis functioned. And you realize the 5,000 was in Jewish territory, and as you mentioned, the 4,000s. So those are the things where we want people to go, why do I need to know that? What can be gleaned, from learning that?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
And that all important question that you mentioned about application.
Yes.
Because that's always meant to be like in any sort of plan of Bible study I've ever seen, that's always the last step. You've wrestled with the text, you've pulled it apart, you've understand all of its context. Then it's the question, well, now what? Mm-hmm. What difference does that make to me here and now, how I live my life?
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Yeah. And that was really the impetus behind even writing Bringing Heaven Here, was there were so many implications. There were so many takeaways that we couldn't fit into the film and the television series. And that was really the thing that we wanted to do. Is we've always said we don't want people just to become smarter. We want them to become more faithful. Mm-hmm. Right. And knowledge doesn't transform until it's applied. And when you apply what you are learning, that's where you experience the transformational power of God in your life. And so we believe that there are ways of engaging the scriptures that's going to help you to understand more in a hurry. But if it just sits in your head and it doesn't move down into your heart and your hands and your feet, then it's just information. If it doesn't transform you, it's just data. Mm-hmm. And we're not interested in the data.
Yeah.
You know?
Yeah.
Well, Brad Nelson, where should everybody go to start encountering all of this stuff?
Yeah. So believe it or not, as we were coming down the home stretch of this project, Brad the Gray got online and discovered that there was a website that had not been purchased yet called thelordsprayer.com. So we said, yes, please.
Internet Christians, you failed.
Exactly. And I'm grateful for that failure. That little oversight became a portal for us to be able to funnel everything through.
Forgive us our trespasses. No. Click buy.
Yeah, so you can, everything related to the book, the film, and the series that's going to be launching next Easter, all of that can be found at thelordsprayer.com.
Wonderful stuff. And if you want to find out more about you, your other projects, Brad the Gray, where should they go?
Yeah, so our other, overarching organization is Walking the Text, and people can go to walkingthetext.com. And between walkingthetext.com and thelordsprayer.com, they've pretty much got us covered. So,
wonderful.
Yep.
Well, Brads, thank you very much for joining us today.
Yes, thanks for having us, David. That's been great.
And viewers, please join us again next time. We'll continue going further up and further in. Cheers.